Thank you for all. Assalamu alaikum. A brief information about me. I am from Ankara University, Faculty of Divinity. I spent my approximately 50 years in my wonderful faculty, Department of Sunnah, my department, my special studies about the problems of Islamic world relating to the Sunnah and Hadith. My publications mainly, unfortunately, in Turkish because of the conditions in Turkey, because Turkey is very important society, but the problems mostly must be detailed or must be studied in detail in Turkish because of the current conditions. Conditions are worse than the past, unfortunately, in Turkey, especially in the Islamic thought and Islamic currents, unfortunately. That is why I prefer to publish my works in Turkish, but some of my works in English and Arabic. I can, in my website, you can find all of my works and list and other things. That is why I apologize you not to give detailed information about my academic career. Now I am retired from the faculty after working 40 years at that faculty. My subject is Tawatur, omitted historical evidence. The problem is, as you see, scholars agree or mainly agree that authenticity debate is deadlocked, overlocked over the initial assumptions. This is our starting point. This is the statement of Daniel Brown. Gauzier's broad premise won the day, because I wrote on Gauzier before, during the COVID disease all over the world. I've spent my 1 year on a work to evaluate Muslims' approaches to Gauzier. Unfortunately, the result was also a catastrophe, very bad results I faced when I studied studies on Gauzier. That's why I surprised when Daniel Brown said that one of the Gauzier's broad premise won the day. This is our starting point. Debates going on about authenticity problem. So we need to improve, not to repeat the same arguments. We need to improve. I thought if it is possible to improve in these debates, because Turkish scholars mainly out of these debates because of the language, unfortunately. A second point is a possibility of contributions of Usul al-Fiqh and Usul al-Din to debates about the possibility of the authentic debates. I believe that the mutawātir concept of mutawātir can be a good starting point to make a contribution to these debates. Yes, but mutawātir here, another point, unnoticed, because when we look at the modern Islamic studies, mutawātir doesn't have enough attention, or doesn't have enough attraction maybe from the scholars. That's why I want to bring the problem of all the mutawātir to your attention, because it really deserves to study on it's what we mean here by tawatur is as a universal concept, not an Islamic concept. I will explain a little bit this point. Introductory remarks, mutawātir is not unique to Islamic tradition because we are living or we are getting many informations in our daily lives depending upon mutawātir. So as a common practice, so I depend mainly upon universal mutawātir, not Islamic mutawātir. I will explain it later. Although widespread discourse in the East and West, mutawātir is a hadith term. This does not adequately reflect the factual reality because hadith scholars did not seem to be interested in the issue of mutawātir. Very interesting. Mutawātir is not a hadith term. On the contrary, mutawātir is a usul al-fiqh and usul al-din term or concept. This is because you cannot find. That is why hadith scholars did not seem to be interested in the issue of mutawātir and left it entirely to the scholars of Islamic jurisprudence and to the scholars of theology to some degree. Sorry for not presenting here the footnotes and the references. All of these references it given in my paper. Unfortunately, I couldn't present here because it is very long. So all of these informations you can find in the part paper with footnotes and references. That's why not the hadith scholars, but the scholars of usul al-fiqh and usul al-din who are pursuing certainty have focused on mutawātir primarily and extensively in their works, mainly under the title of al-Akbar. You cannot find any usul al-fiqh book without this title of Akbar. Sometimes, for example, al-Jassas, approximately 250 pages about Al-Akbar, or under the title of Al-Akbar, you can find close to 300 pages in his Usul al-Fiqh. Universal character of tawatur according to Islamic, but even though we can divide mutawātir into Islamic and universal, but Islamic scholars also, they deal with the issue of tawatur in Usul al-Fiqh and Usul al-Din literature, largely on a secular level. And the secular nature of the most examples, they gave many examples to mutawātir. Most of the examples they gave from secular level or from secular part of daily life. This point has two remarkable implications. First, since their primary the reason for this, since their primary interlocutors are non-Muslims, they should deal with the issue of not based on Islamic dogma, but on the reason and experience, which is a universal and common epistemological ground between Muslims and non-Muslims. This is the first point. Secondly, the fact that they chose these examples from other religions, cultures, and civilizations rather than Islamic societies must show that they had a clear idea about the universal character of the tawatur in their minds. What about tawatur, which is the subject of this study? The tawatur, which I will discuss here, somewhat different. This concept is discussed in modern studies. It is dealt with as a part of the past, not as something adaptable to the present day or as a part of modern methods of questioning the reliability of historical sources, not only for Muslims but also for non-Muslims too. So, by the way, the mutawātir approach can be useful not only for Muslims but also non-Muslims too. Our aim is to discuss the possibility of making tawatur free from being spatial to Islamic tradition and to transform it into a method that non-Muslims can also more broadly take into consideration. In the most general sense, definitions of tawatur are mainly divided into two main groups, as a part of the Islamic tradition and as a universal phenomenon. We would like to remind that tawatur has been considered as an Islamic phenomenon to a large extent in the late period of Islamic tradition, and the initially dominant universal dimension of this phenomenon has been increasingly, not completely, increasingly overshadowed or neglected. Aside from the claim that narrators of mutawātir reports must be Muslims, there are other definitions that do not consider this condition obligatory. As far as we know, Abul Qasim al-Balkhi was the first to openly state that it does not matter whether the narrators are Muslims or infidels or fasiq in the mutawātir reports. Similar statements can be also seen in Al-Fisal of Ibn Hazm, Al-Musawwada of Al-Ibn Taymiyyah, and Tawjih al-Nazar al-Tahir al-Jazairi. Some scholars have put forward other conditions for tawatur that are not generally approved. This point also important because many unapproved conditions in Islamic tradition, it became clear that they are very, very important unapproved points. These unapproved points, for example, agents, reporters of tawatur must be too many to be counted or to live in a one town. The ancestral religions and sects of the informers must be different. The reporters must be Muslim and just. Those who participate in tawatur must not be compelled to report presence of the innocent imam among the others. These are unapproved conditions. General unapproved conditions will be our starting point. The condition B, ancestral religions and must be different. This is very important. Condition B of belonging to different segments ethnically, geographically, and religiously, which is said to be not generally accepted, is extremely remarkable and important for us because a tawatur that encompasses all ethnic, geographical, religious, etc. differences actually discloses the definition of tawatur in the universal sense. To summarize the Islamic tradition on the subject of mutawātir, it can be said that it consists of the intersection of information from multiple and different sources. This main word may be multiple and different sources. So it's possible to characterize tawatur in a sense difference in multiplicity and multiplicity in difference. In fact, this is the situation regarding mutawātir in our daily life. There is a lot of information, knowledge that we do not have the slightest doubt about its truthfulness, although we have not seen or heard it by ourselves. Some is true about some of our knowledge of the past. Do we have the slightest doubt about the existence of historical figures and dynasties such as the Aristotle, Socrates, Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, Napoleon, Muhammad II, Umayyads, and Abbasid, for example? Do we have also any doubt about the existence of the continents we have not seen or lands we have not stepped foot in or cities we have not visited? What compels us to believe such a matters without a shadow of doubt is nothing but the concurrence or intersection of information coming to us from various multiple channels of different nature on a common point and the confidence this situation provides. As to the applying tawatur to different sources of early Islam, so this question is similar approach possible for information and reports about early Islam coming from different and multiple sources and channels? As to the sources of early Islam, mainly in Islamic world, it is unfortunately bad habitus that most Islamic scholars depending upon written Islamic sources, forgetting or neglecting other sources. Mainly, some of the sources of early Islam Quran as a historical document and source. Yes, there are some discussions about the historicity or authenticity of the Quran. I am not neglecting these discussions, but to some degree there is a common opinion between the scholars from the West and East that the Quran also we can use the Quran as a historical document. Some original diplomatic letters of the Prophet, sacred relics, rock inscriptions of the Hijaz, archaeological findings from Arabian region, numismatic findings, non-Muslim written historical sources, chronicles, travel notes, officials and religious reports, written material from the pre-Quranic prophetic period, mostly from South Arabia, collections containing manuscripts close to the period of the Prophet, including the Quran fragments, Yemen, Sinai, as you know, and additional sources, also very important, or disciplines like astronomy, geography, topography, meteorology, etc. When these multiple sources are viewed carefully, it will be seen that they are also sources belonging to different geographies, religions, cultures, ethnicities, and languages. Listen in the gap. This is our aim. This book, another very useful book for my presentation, Hoyland's book, Seeing Islam as Others Saw It. He says that this book, I agree with him, it offers a new approach to the vexing question of how to write the early history of Islam. The first part discusses the nature of Muslim and non-Muslim source material for 7th and 8th century Middle East and argues that by listening the divide between these two traditions, which has largely been erected by modern scholarship, we can come to a better appreciation of this crucial period. My paper is continuation of Robert Hoyland's approach to some degree. My aim also elevating revisionist distrust of written Islamic sources. I don't disregard the revisionist claims completely, never. But my aim is also, as Hoyland said, to listening the gap between the revision and between the optimist scholars of West and East. Why not consider introducing the concept of tawātur here as a continuation of Robert Hoyland's search for a solution and compromise to the revisionist objections? In this context, why not consider using all the possibilities mentioned above relating to the 10 categories of early Islamic sources without limiting ourselves to one of these sources only? If we decide to do this, we will encounter an interesting situation that is suitable for putting tawātur into practice in accordance with the main characteristics of its universal definition, multiplicity and diversity. As for multiplicity, as you know, it is clearly seen that there are highly multiple and different sources in various respects. As for the diversity, it is also clear that these sources belong not only to Muslims, but at the same time to non-Muslims from different regions, cultures, religions, and ethnicities. At this point, tawātur in universal sense can be used to cross-check multiple information from sources of different geographies, cultures, religions, ethnicities, and languages. The intersectional information from these different sources will give us more confidence than using them separately one by one. These supposed intersections can sometimes be quite general in nature, not in detail, and can be related to some details about early Islam too. Of course, we cannot be confident enough to claim that the intersectional information assumed here will be undeniably mathematically precise. On this point, maybe the revisionist claims must not be neglected on this point. Although some of sources in those categories are close to certainty, some of them are quite open to questioning, but at least these intersections will serve to reduce scientific skepticism on those issues, because the intersection and convergence of completely different sources and their information reaching us through various multiple ways at one point is logically not conducive to being fictional or fake. At the very least, it is clear that this mutually supportive information deserves to be taken too seriously instead of being easily or completely dismissed. Leaving this universal tawatur approach, which is as the theory without an example of early Islam, would of course be a serious shortcoming. That is why I chose here three examples using normal. This is also Hoyland's statements. In this chapter, in this chapter, three issues have been selected upon which there is disagreement or indifference in the secondary literature. Yes, here. As an application of this theory, I chose three examples from Hoyland. This is also because my chance. First thing, Islam in the first century. According to Hoyland, Islam under this title, it is aimed to shed light on the debates on whether the elements that are considered characteristic of Islam today have existed since the early period, and it has been shown that the information given in Islamic sources can be largely confirmed by non-Islamic historical sources. It details in the book of Hoyland, Seeing Islam in as others saw it. Second direction, or separate direction in Islam, the Qibla. It has been shown that the debates around the differences in the Qibla direction of the masjids and the mosques belonging to the early period can be subjected to a rational and reasonable interpretation in the light of non-Islamic sources and astronomical data. As a matter of fact, Hoyland says that Qibla direction was kept wide enough to be accepted as the Qibla between East and West in the early periods. He presents us many Arabic from the fiqh literature and other Islamic literature on this regard. Qibla direction was kept wide enough to be accepted as the Qibla between East and West in the early periods, and there were calculation errors in the early periods, and meticulous calculations emerged later with the whites. Dr. Ayub I, a colleague from Gaziantep University, from Turkey, Ayub I also states that Muslims used sunset point as a reference in determining the direction of the Qibla while burying their dead and building their mosques, and that deviations close to 30 degrees sometimes occur in determining Qibla, since there is an angle of about 30 degrees 27 minutes among the sunset ranges between summer and winter. So the differences about the informations in the early phase of Islamic history, Islamic sources or un-Islamic sources, if there are some problems, we can solve these problems with the aid of astronomy or other or archaeology or other disciplines. The conquest of these informations in the early sources of early Islam, Islamic sources and non-Islamic sources, can be confirmed in modern findings of the other sciences. The conquest of Egypt, it has also been shown that the information provided by Islamic historical sources on Byzantine-Muslim relation, the political military situation of the Byzantine Empire, and the core events of the conquest of Egypt can be taken seriously into the light of the Islamic sources. I don't want to say that there is no problem about the sources, Islamic or not, but we can, at least it is possible to reach to core events of some developments in the early Islam. However, universal tawatur claim is not used to some critics, because in Islamic tradition means it is precise, completely, you cannot object or you cannot deny the information coming from tawatur. But universal tawatur is not something like, or even according to Islamic scholars, Islamic mutawātir also is not something not deniable. be Islamic or universal tawatur, the dominant paradigm in Islamic tradition is that mutawātir is certain and means zero error. However, since the beginning of the Islamic tradition, the marginal view that mutawātir can give near confidence or near accuracy rather than a mathematical certainty has preserved its existence for many centuries. So in Islamic tradition also we have some clues about this idea. Another point which shows that the classical Islamic scholars were aware of this critical situation is the claim that tawatur certainty was not logical but only customarily practical in daily life. That's why they said that عادة or fil aada or fil adat, which is emphasized in almost all definitions of tawatur. On the other hand, it is possible to say that the objections of those who claim that tawatur cannot give us mathematical certainty in the Islamic tradition are based on logical arguments. Yes. That is why who accepted tawatur as a mathematically precise, as customarily, who criticized this idea logically, because even mutawātir logically can be wrong. There's no problem. But in our daily life, as I said, on the other hand, it is possible to say that objections of those who claim that tawatur cannot give us mathematical certainty in Islamic tradition are based on logical arguments. Indeed, it is not logically impossible for tawatur, which is believed to be precise and certain as a phenomenon belonging to daily life throughout history, to be open to error. Although this objection is logically correct and valid, it did not prevent tawatur from being actually working in the factual world and yielding positive results. I think, yes. Why we consider these marginal views in classical Islam to take them seriously or reconsider today? Firstly, is logical and hypothetical. What will be the situation when we have information opposite direction? There's a mutawātir and there are informations on the opposite direction, which does not fall short of mutawātir in terms of certainty today. For example, what will be done? The dates given both in Islamic and non-Islamic sources regarding lunar and solar eclipses that took place in early Islamic history don't comply with modern astronomical calculation. That's a problem. Another reason is related to the nature of information of different character coming from multiple channels. So to what extent this information given by these particular sources reflect the facts? There are some problems also as to the multiplicity and diversity of the sources. These problems also stated or studied by Hoyland under the three titles. What is the source of the observation? Because observations, Muslims or non-Muslims, for the early Islam can face many problems. And what is the character of observation? What is the subject of the observation? Details of all these subjects you can find in the book of Hoyland. The common denominator is cumulative and cross-cutting knowledge of universal practices. Does not mean ignoring the thesis of revisionist approaches or dismissing them all at once. On the contrary, this universal tawatur approach is an effort of scholarly inquiry that can be instrumental in both revisionist and optimistic approaches to the sources in order to review their own positions. At the same time, universal tawatur will serve to reinforce a tendency in modern studies of early Islam to consume all available sources rather than to settle for limited sources. This issue is especially important for Islamic countries where the tendency to be content with only written Islamic sources is extremely strong. Another vital importance for Islamic studies in Islamic countries is that in order to have a chance to complete with studies of early Islam outside the Islamic world, it is necessary to abandon the habit of relying only on written sources and ignoring other sources without blame. I think, this is the latest. Whatever the developments and debates on the sources of early Islam, it is too early for a consensus at this time on the sources of early Islam. In this case, as Stephen Humphrey and others said above, we still have to rely on our intuitions about sources. In other words, we need to be satisfied through increasing the reliability of the conclusions in accordance with the logic of probability about the facts of the early period of Islam and the reliability of the information given in Islamic and non-Islamic sources about this period. In this context, what Richard Carrier said on a particular issue, such as the historicity of Muhammad, seems so plausible that it can actually be extended to the early Islam as a whole. The question must be asked, how likely is that evidence's collective existence, including what is absent, if Muhammad minimally existent, and how likely is it if he didn't? The ratio between the latter two probabilities gives us likelihood ratio or bias factor favoring historicity. When that ratio is multiplied by the ratio of the prior probabilities for and against historicity, you get at the odds that Muhammad minimally existed. If this XA can contribute to reinforcing, strengthening these intuitions or contingency odds ratio by grounding them firmly through universal tawātir approach, it will be a modest contribution. Thanks for your good listening.